Picture the whole planet underwater, not a flooded city, not a drowned coastline. The entire Earth, every continent, every mountain range, gone. The Bible says the water rose until it covered the highest peaks, and then kept rising, higher still, until there was nothing left to see but a grey ocean stretching in every direction. Genesis describes a world that had become one single endless sea. And then, a few verses later, it's gone. The land comes back. The mountains push up out of the water. Noah opens the door, steps out onto dry ground, and the world simply carries on. But stop right there, because almost nobody does. If the entire planet was buried under water higher than the mountains, then that is more water than exists in every ocean on Earth today, several times over. An unimaginable amount. A crushing, planet-sized volume of it. Water doesn't just vanish. It can't evaporate into nothing. It has to go somewhere. So where did an entire drowned planet's worth of water actually go? Where is it right now? Is it still here? And why is this the one question about the flood that the picture books, the sermons, and almost every retelling you've ever heard quietly skip right over? The answer is hiding in the text itself, and it's stranger and bigger than it rained, and then it dried up. Let's get into it. How does a planet's worth of water appear, drown everything, and then disappear again in the space of a single chapter? To even start answering that, you have to read what the text actually says about where the water came from. Because when we picture the flood, we picture rain, 40 days and 40 nights of it, and that's in there. But that is only half of what Genesis describes, and it's the smaller half. Genesis chapter 7 verse 11 gives you the real picture, and it names two completely different sources of water, not one. It says that on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the windows of heaven were opened. Read that again. Two things happen at once. Something breaks open below, the fountains of the great deep, and something opens above, the windows of heaven. So the rain, the 40 days, is really the windows of heaven. Water from above. But the text puts something else first, before it even mentions the rain. The fountains of the great deep. Water from below. And the Hebrew there is worth stopping on, because the phrase is the fountains of the great deep, and the word for the deep is tehom. That's the same word used way back in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, when the world is first being formed and darkness lies over the face of the deep. The tehom, the primal water underneath everything. And that matters enormously for our question, because it means the flood was not just weather. It wasn't a very big storm. The text describes the actual foundations of the world breaking open and water coming up from inside the earth. Some scholars read the whole flood as a kind of undoing of creation. In Genesis 1, God separates the waters and holds them back to make dry land. In the flood, those same waters come crashing back in from above and below, and the dry land is swallowed again. The world briefly returns to what it was before day one, a planet with no land, just water over the face of the deep. And the language guards how singular this event is. Hebrew has ordinary words for a flood, for a rushing river, for an overflowing torrent. But this event gets its own special word, Mabul. It's a word the Hebrew Bible reserves almost entirely for this one catastrophe, the waters of Noah, and it shows up in only one other place, a single line in the Psalms where God is enthroned over the Mabul, over the flood, as king. So the writers weren't reaching for the word you'd use for a bad storm or a swollen river. They picked a word that means this, the one time the deep came back over everything. That alone should tell you the text is not describing normal weather. It's describing an unmaking. Now watch how far the water goes, because this is where the sheer scale of the problem hits you. Genesis 7 says the waters prevailed and rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. And then it gives you a number. The waters rose 15 cubits above the mountains. 15 cubits is around 22 feet. So the text isn't just saying the water reached the mountain tops. It's saying it went over them, with more than 20 feet to spare, so that even the highest peaks were completely submerged with room on top. Try to actually picture the volume of water that requires. If you wanted to cover every mountain on Earth as it stands today, to bury a peak like Everest under 22 feet of water, you would need to add somewhere around 4.5 billion cubic kilometers of extra water to the planet. That is roughly 3 times all the water in all the oceans that currently exist. 3 entire extra planet oceans appearing and then leaving again. That's the kind of number that stops making sense the longer you look at it. And it forces the question that this whole video is built around. That water had to come from somewhere, and then it had to go somewhere. It can't be conjured and it can't be deleted. So the mystery actually splits into 2. Because remember, the text gave us 2 sources: the water from below, the fountains of the great deep, and the water from above, the windows of heaven. So when the flood ends, there are 2 disappearances to explain, not 1. Where did the water from below go back to? And where did the water from above go? Hold on to that, because those 2 answers turn out to be completely different, and only one of them is simple. And here is the part that makes this a real mystery instead of a Sunday school lesson. Watch how the text handles the ending, because it is oddly specific about the machinery of it. Genesis chapter 8 opens with a strange, beautiful line. It says, God remembered Noah and every living thing in the ark, and God made a wind pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. Then it says, the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped. The rain was restrained, and the waters returned from off the earth continually. The waters returned, not vanished, returned. The Hebrew phrase behind returned continually is haloch vashov, which literally carries the sense of going and coming back, going and returning, the way a tide pulls out in stages. The text is not describing water disappearing, it is describing water draining, going somewhere, receding in stages, back to wherever it belongs. So Genesis itself is quietly telling you the answer to our question is not that the water ceased to exist, it's that the water went back. The only thing left to figure out is back to where. And the text does something you almost never notice. It doesn't just say the water left, it gives you a calendar of it leaving, spread across months, like a receipt. Genesis chapter 8 lays out the stages one by one. The waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. Then they began to go down, and in the 7th month the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. But the tops of the other mountains weren't even visible yet. It took until the 10th month, months later, before the peaks of the mountains could be seen at all. Then Noah waited another 40 days and sent out a raven, and then a dove. And the dove came back with nothing, because there was still nowhere dry for it to land. Only weeks after that did the water finally drain off enough for the bare ground to appear. Read that slowly, and you realize the flood didn't end like someone pulling a plug. It ebbed away over the better part of a year, in measured stages, exactly the way water behaves when it's finding its level and draining off into somewhere lower. The text isn't vague about the water leaving. It practically times it with a stopwatch. So the only real question, again, is where all of it was draining to. To find where a planet's worth of water can possibly drain to, we have to start with the strangest possibility of all, that most of it never actually left, that it's still here, right now, all around you. And once you see where it's hiding, you'll never look at a map of the world the same way again. Here's a fact that sounds made up but isn't. Look at the Earth from space, and it is not really a green planet or a brown one. It's a blue one. About 71% of the surface of this planet is ocean, water. Right now, today, with no flood happening, most of the world is already under the sea. We just happen to live on the parts that stick up. And we forget that because we spend our lives on the dry bits. But the dry land is the minority. The default state of the surface of this planet is water. So when the Bible says the whole world was covered by the sea, it's describing something that is, in a strange way, almost the natural condition of the earth. The land is the exception. The land is what has to be held up out of the water, and that single shift in perspective is the first real key to the mystery, because there's a step almost nobody takes. They picture the flood as needing some enormous outside delivery of water, a cosmic bucket poured onto a normal dry earth. But what if the earth wasn't shaped the way it is now? What if the mountains were lower and the ocean basins were shallower? Think about what that would mean. You wouldn't need to import 3 extra oceans from space. You would just need the water you already have to spread out over a flatter surface. And this is not just a nice idea, it's measurable. Scientists have actually run the numbers on this. If you took the Earth as it is today, with all its water, and you smoothed the entire surface completely flat, leveling every mountain, filling in every ocean trench, so the planet was a perfectly smooth ball, the water we already have would cover the whole globe, not in a puddle, to a depth of around 2.5 to 2.7 kilometers. That's over 1.5 miles of water, everywhere, over the entire planet. Sit with that for a second, because it completely reframes the question. There is already enough water on Earth today to drown the entire planet under more than 1 mile of ocean. The only reason you're not underwater right now is that the mountains stick up and the ocean basins are deep enough to hold the water down in them. The water isn't missing. The water was never the problem. The shape of the ground is the only thing keeping your head above it. And there's a way to actually see how much water we're talking about, all at once. Scientists sometimes gather up every drop of water on Earth in a single calculation. Every ocean, every sea, every lake and river, all the ice, all the groundwater, all the moisture in the air, and they imagine it collected into one single ball floating next to the planet. And here's the surprise. That ball is smaller than you'd guess, only a few 100 miles across, because the oceans are wide but shockingly thin, a mere film of water over an enormous rock. And yet it is still an almost unimaginable volume, well over 1 billion cubic kilometers of water. That is the water in play. That is everything the flood had to work with, and none of it left. Every drop in that sphere is still here, sitting in the basins, soaked into the ground, or frozen into the ice. So now the flood question flips completely. The mystery was never really where would you get that much water. The water is right here. The real mystery becomes, how did the ground change shape? How did the mountains get low enough for the water to cover them, and then get tall enough again to drain it all off? And here is where you find one of the most overlooked passages in the entire Bible, a passage that answers this question directly in poetry, and that almost nobody connects to the flood. Psalm 104 is a song about creation, and in the middle of it, verses 6 through 9, it says something that reads like a slow-motion replay of exactly what we're asking about. Listen to this. It says of the earth, "You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down, to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth." Read what that just described. The waters stood above the mountains. That's the flood at its peak, the whole world submerged. Then, at God's rebuke, the waters flee. And how do they flee? The mountains rose, and the valleys sank down. The land itself moves, mountains push up, basins drop down, and the water pours off the rising land into the sinking valleys, into the deepening ocean basins, and gets locked down there. And then the final line, you set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. That they might not again cover the earth. That is a flood line. That is God promising the water will never again do what it just did. It's the same promise made to Noah in Genesis 9, in a different language, sung as poetry. Many scholars read Psalm 104, 6 through 9, as a poetic description of the flood receding, or of the same creative act that first tamed the waters. And it hands you a mechanism in plain words. The water went down because the ground went up. The mountains rose, the valleys sank, and the sea drained off the land into the deep places prepared for it, and a boundary was set so it could never climb back. Now that phrase, the mountains rose and the valleys sank, isn't only poetry. It has a real name in geology, and the real thing genuinely happens. It's called isostasy. The idea is simple. The hard crust of the earth isn't resting on solid ground. It's floating on the hot, slowly flowing rock of the mantle beneath it, the way a raft floats on water. And like anything floating, it rides higher or settles lower, depending on the load it carries. Pile enormous weight onto a slab of crust, a mile of ice or a mile of water, and that section slowly sinks. Take the weight off, and it slowly lifts back up. Geologists watch this happening right now. Parts of Scandinavia and Canada are still rising today by whole centimeters every decade, rebounding from the weight of Ice Age glaciers that melted thousands of years ago. So the picture Psalm 104 paints, of basins sinking under the weight of water and land rising as the load comes off, is describing something the earth actually does, slowly, in the ordinary world. Whether it could ever happen fast is the real argument, but the mechanism itself is not invented. And those deep places are real, and they are deeper than almost anyone pictures. Off the coast of the Pacific, there's a scar in the ocean floor called the Mariana Trench, and at its lowest point, it plunges nearly 11 kilometers straight down. That's almost 7 miles. Take Mount Everest, the highest point on the surface of the earth, turn it upside down, and drop it into that trench, and its peak would still be more than a mile underwater. That is how much room the ocean basins have to swallow water. The dry land we live on is a thin crust riding above pits deep enough to hide the tallest mountains on the planet with room to spare. When Psalm 104 says, "The valleys sank down to the place appointed for them," this is the kind of place it's describing. Somewhere for an ocean to go and never be seen again. So that's the first answer, and it's the biggest one. Most of the floodwater didn't have to go anywhere exotic. It went into the ocean basins, and it's still sitting there. It is the ocean you can visit today. The flood, in this reading, never fully drained away at all. You're looking at the leftover water every time you stand on a beach. But that only works if the ground can actually rise and sink like that. And what could possibly have enough force to move the mountains themselves? For that, we have to go back to that first source of water, the one from below, the fountains of the great deep. The fountains of the great deep. It's the first thing Genesis mentions when the flood begins, before the rain, and it might be the most important 4 words in this entire mystery. Because if the flood ended with mountains rising and basins sinking, something had to drive that, something violent enough to reshape the crust of the planet, and the text points down, into the earth, to water that came from inside it. So what is the great deep? For most of history, readers pictured it vaguely, some underground sea, chambers of water sealed beneath the ground that burst up when the flood began. And the text does seem to describe exactly that. Subterranean water, breaking through the crust with enough force to help submerge a planet. For centuries that sounded like pure myth. There couldn't be that much water locked inside the Earth, right? Now, before I get to what modern science actually found down there, I have to be fair and lay out the theory that some people build directly on this verse, because you'll run into it the moment you start searching this topic. There's a model developed by a small number of scientists who take the flood as literal global history called catastrophic plate tectonics. Its best-known proponent is a geophysicist named John Baumgartner, who genuinely did serious computer modeling of the Earth's mantle. In this model, the flood was driven by a runaway process. Slabs of the ocean floor suddenly sank into the mantle. Superheated water blasted up out of the sea floor as the fountains of the Great Deep. The continents shifted rapidly, and at the end of it, the ocean basins sank. The mountains buckled upward, and the water ran off exactly as Psalm 104 describes. Now, I want to be straight with you, the way this channel always tries to be. Catastrophic plate tectonics is not mainstream science. The great majority of geologists reject it completely because standard geology has plate tectonics happening slowly over hundreds of millions of years, not in a single year, and a process that fast would release staggering amounts of heat that the model struggles to explain. So this is a specific belief held by young Earth creationists, not established fact, and I'm not going to sell it to you as proven. But it's worth knowing it exists, because it's a serious attempt to take that phrase, the fountains of the Great Deep, and ask what it would physically require, and it hangs the entire drainage of the flood on water coming up from inside the planet. But here is where it gets genuinely strange, and this part is not fringe theory. This is mainstream, peer-reviewed, front-page science. Because in the last few decades, geologists went looking for water inside the Earth, and they found it, a staggering, almost unbelievable amount of it. In 2014, a team of scientists published a discovery in the journal Nature that made headlines around the world. A tiny, battered diamond had been dug up from a riverbed in Juína, Brazil. It was ugly, commercially worthless, the kind of diamond a jeweler throws away. But that diamond had been forged hundreds of kilometers down inside the Earth, and on its violent journey to the surface, it had trapped a microscopic sample of the deep interior like a message in a bottle. And when they analyzed what was sealed inside it, they found a mineral called ringwoodite. And that ringwoodite was wet. Around 1.5% of its weight was water, locked right into its crystal structure. Now think about where that came from. That diamond came from a layer deep inside the Earth called the transition zone, roughly 410 to 660 kilometers down, far below the crust, far below anywhere we can drill. And if the tiny sample in that one diamond is typical of that whole layer, then the amount of water bound up in the rock down there is beyond imagining. Some scientists estimate that the transition zone could hold as much water as all the oceans on the surface combined, possibly several oceans worth. An amount of water locked inside the planet that could rival or exceed everything on the surface. I want to be careful and honest here, because this is exactly where people overreach online. That deep water is not a hidden underground sea you could swim in. It's not a cavern full of liquid. It is water chemically bound inside solid rock, wedged into the structure of minerals under crushing pressure. So I am not standing here telling you scientists found Noah's fountains of the deep. That would be overclaiming, and this channel doesn't do that. But look honestly at the shape of it. An ancient Hebrew text, thousands of years old, said the flood came from the fountains of the Great Deep, from water inside the Earth. And modern geology, using diamonds as messengers from the underworld, discovered that there really is a colossal reservoir of water hidden deep inside our planet, more than anyone ever thought possible. Whatever you make of that, it is a haunting thing to sit with. And that deep mantle water isn't even the only hidden reservoir down there. There's a second one, much closer to the surface, and you've almost certainly drunk from it. Beneath the ground you walk on, soaked into the pores of rock and sand, sits a vast, concealed supply of water we call groundwater. It fills wells, it feeds springs, and there is a staggering quantity of it. Add up all the groundwater in just the top couple of miles of the Earth's crust, and it comes to millions of cubic kilometers, far more than every river and lake on the surface put together. Some of it has been down there, in the dark, for thousands of years. So when the flood pulled back, not every drop from below had to blast back up and race to the sea. A colossal amount of it could simply soak back down into the ground it rose from, into the aquifers and the pores of the rock, and quietly settle there. When Genesis says the fountains of the deep were stopped, this is part of where that water went. Underneath you right now, as you watch this. So that's the water from below. It may have come up from inside the earth, and when the flood ended, an enormous amount of water drained back down into the deep and into the ocean basins that sank to receive it. One source, arguably, accounted for, but we still have the other one, the windows of heaven, the rain. And that water plays by completely different rules, because water that falls from the sky cannot simply drain back up into it. While everyone argues about the fountains below, the text was pointing somewhere else at the same time. Up. The windows of heaven were opened. This is the water most people actually picture when they think of the flood. The rain. 40 days and 40 nights of it, falling without stopping. And here's the problem that Source creates for us, because it doesn't behave like the water from below at all. Think about it. Water that came up from inside the earth can drain back down inside the earth. That's a loop. It can close. But water that fell out of the sky as rain cannot unfall. It can't drain back up through the clouds and get reabsorbed into the heavens. Once that water is down, it's down. It has to stay on the surface. So every drop that came through the windows of heaven had to go into the one place that could hold it. The ocean. That rain didn't disappear. It became part of the sea, and it's still in the sea today. Quick pause here, because we're right at the heart of it now. If you're the kind of person who would rather know what the text actually says and what the science actually found, then repeat the flattened version from the picture books. Subscribe. That's the entire point of this channel. Every week I take one story people are sure they already understand, and we go back to the original words and the oldest sources and the real evidence to find out what's genuinely there. It honestly helps these deeper readings reach people who've only ever heard the shallow version. All right, but that raises a much harder question. Where did that much rain come from in the first place? A normal sky doesn't hold anywhere near enough water to flood the world. If you squeezed every drop of moisture out of the entire atmosphere right now, all the clouds, all the humidity across the whole planet, you'd get maybe an inch or two of rain over the surface. Nowhere close to 40 days of world-drowning downpour. So the pre-flood sky, if this happened, had to be holding water on a scale our sky simply doesn't. And that's led to one of the most famous theories in this whole discussion, and I have to flag it carefully, because it sits on the border between what the text says and what people have built on top of it. It's called the vapor canopy theory. Go back to Genesis 1, where God divides the waters below from the waters above, with something the text calls the rakia, the expanse or firmament, in between. Some readers took that phrase, the waters above, and ran with it. They pictured the pre-flood earth wrapped in a vast canopy of water vapor, a warm, misty greenhouse world, watered not by rain, but by a mist rising from the ground. And then, at the flood, that canopy collapsed. The waters above came crashing down as the windows of heaven and drowned the world. It's a striking picture, and it neatly explains where all that rain came from. But I have to be honest with you, because being honest is the whole brand here. The vapor canopy theory has serious problems, and it's been largely abandoned even by many of the creation scientists who used to champion it. The biggest issue is heat. A canopy holding that much water would trap so much heat that the pre-flood Earth would have been a boiling oven, far too hot for anything to live. So most researchers on all sides have quietly set the canopy idea down. I'm laying it out because you'll hear it constantly, but I'm not going to tell you it's proven, because it isn't. It's speculation built on two words, the waters above, and plenty of people who love this text reject it. But here's the piece of the ending that I find genuinely moving, and it's sitting right there in the text and almost everyone skips it. Remember how the flood ends. Genesis 8, verse 1. God made a wind pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. A wind, and the Hebrew word for wind there is ruach. Now hold on to that word because you have met it before, at the very beginning. In Genesis 1, verse 2, before creation takes shape, the ruach of God, the Spirit of God, hovers over the face of the waters. The same word. Wind, breath, spirit. So, at creation, the Spirit hovers over the waters and brings forth dry land. And at the flood, a wind passes over the waters and brings the dry land back. The text is rhyming with itself across thousands of years. And there's one more echo. Much later, when God parts the Red Sea to rescue Israel, Exodus says he drove the sea back with a strong east wind all night and made the sea into dry land. A wind, water driven back, and dry land appearing. The same fingerprints, the same ruach, every time God pulls solid ground up out of the water. Whatever the physical mechanism, evaporation, the wind pushing water into the sinking basins, the text keeps telling you the same thing. The dry land you're standing on was lifted back out of the water on purpose, by the same breath that made it in the first place. And there's one more place that water went, and it's the one people forget completely. Not all of it stayed liquid. Look at the planet today, and a huge share of the world's water isn't in the ocean at all. It's frozen. The ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland alone hold so much water that if they melted, global sea level would climb by around 200 feet, swallowing coastlines everywhere. That is an ocean's worth of water, taken out of the sea and locked up solid at the poles and on the high mountains. So some of the flood's water, on any reading, never came back as a wave. It came back as ice, and it's sitting there still. And some who take the flood as history argue the aftermath is exactly what built that ice. Their model runs like this. The flood left the oceans unusually warm, pumping moisture into the sky, while volcanic ash from all that upheaval shaded the land and chilled it. And the result was a single brutal ice age that stacked up the polar caps in centuries rather than the slow ages of the standard timeline. I have to flag that clearly because it's a specific creationist reconstruction, and mainstream geology instead dates the ice ages to long, slow, repeating cycles driven by the Earth's orbit. But both sides agree on the plain fact that matters for us. A vast portion of the planet's water is not in the sea at all. It's standing in ice, held out of the ocean, part of the very same missing water we've been chasing this whole time. So between the two sources, we've got the shape of an answer. The water from below drained back into the deep and the sinking ocean basins. The water from above stayed as ocean, driven back and held down by the wind and the rising land. Almost all of it still here. But there's a completely different way to answer this whole question, one that a lot of serious, faithful scholars actually prefer. And it makes the problem of the missing water dissolve entirely, because it says the water never covered the entire globe in the first place. Everything we've said so far assumes the flood covered the literal entire planet, every continent, pole to pole. But there's a question hiding underneath the English translation that changes the whole problem. and it comes down to a single Hebrew word, eretz. When Genesis says the waters covered the whole earth, the word translated earth is eretz, and eretz carries a range most English readers never see. It doesn't only mean the planet. In fact, most of the time in the Hebrew Bible, it means something smaller. It means land, a region, a country, the ground beneath your feet. It's the same word used when God tells Abraham to leave his eretz, his country. It's the word for the land of Egypt, the eretz of Egypt. So when the flood account says the water covered all the eretz, the honest translator has to ask, all the planet or all the land, meaning all the land in view, the whole region, the entire world as Noah and his neighbors knew it. This is why a lot of scholars, including many who deeply trust the Bible, read the flood as an immense regional catastrophe rather than a literal covering of the entire globe. And you can see why the reading is attractive, because it makes our mystery vanish. If the flood was a catastrophic inundation of the vast Mesopotamian plain, one of the flattest, most flood-prone river basins on Earth, then to the people living in it, the entire world would have been water to the horizon, every mountain they could see, gone, and when it ended, the water simply drained back down the rivers into the Persian Gulf, back to the sea it came from. No missing planet oceans, no need to move mountains. The water went right back where regional floodwater always goes, down to the ocean. The text even gives this reading some room. When it says the water covered all the high hills under the whole heaven, that phrase, under the whole heaven, is exactly how ancient people described everything they could see from horizon to horizon. We still talk this way. We say the sun rises and sets, even though we know the earth is turning. Ancient writers described the world as it appeared to a human standing in it, looking out. So the whole earth under heaven could genuinely mean the entire world of the observer, the whole known land, rather than a satellite view of the globe. But before you settle on the regional answer, watch what the other side does with the exact same words. The global reading has real force too, and I have to be fair, because faithful people land on both sides of this. The language in Genesis is emphatic and piled high, all the high mountains under the heavens covered, every living thing dead, the waters prevailing for 150 days, as if the writer is straining to say this was not a normal flood, this was everything. And the promise never to flood the earth again is harder to make sense of if it was only ever regional. So the debate is real, and it's live, and I'm not going to pretend one side has simply won. But whichever way you lean, notice what just happened to our mystery. On the regional reading, the water never went anywhere strange, it ran back to the sea. On the global reading, the water drained into the deep and the sinking basins and became the oceans we still have. Either way, the answer is the same at its core. The water went down and it went back, and most of it is still here. The picture book idea that a planet's worth of water simply dried up into nothing is the one reading nobody actually holds. And there's something worth noticing about how the rest of the ancient world remembered this, because the flood is not only a Hebrew story. Cultures all over the planet preserved their own accounts of a world-drowning flood, and what fascinates me is that so many of them are just as interested in where the water went as they are in the flood itself. In the old Mesopotamian version, the one carved on clay tablets centuries before Genesis was written, the waters rise and then recede. The boat grounds on the top of a mountain, and the survivor sends out birds to test whether the ground has drained dry. The receding is part of the story. But go all the way to the other side of the world, to ancient China, and you find something even more striking. Chinese tradition remembers a great flood that covered the land for generations, and its central hero isn't the man who survived the water. He's the man who got rid of it. His name is Yu, remembered as You the Great, and the legend says he spent 13 years mastering the flood, not by building a boat, but by carving out channels and dredging the rivers to drain the water off the land and guide it down to the sea. A whole civilization built its founding story not around escaping the flood, but around draining it away. Two cultures on opposite ends of the earth, both fixed on the same question this video is asking. Where does all that water go, and how do you get the land back? And there's one more piece of physical evidence I have to put on the table, because it's the thing flood believers point to first, and it's genuinely strange the moment you learn it. If you climb the highest mountains on Earth, including the Himalayas, and even near the summit of Everest itself, you will find, embedded in the grey rock, the fossilized shells of sea creatures. Ammonites, clams, the remains of ocean life, sitting miles above sea level on the roof of the world. That is a real, verified fact, not a rumor. There are marine fossils near the top of the highest mountain on Earth. And for people who read the flood as global, this is the smoking gun. Of course, there are sea creatures on the mountain tops, they say. The whole world was underwater, and the mountains rose up afterward, lifting the sea floor and everything buried in it high into the sky, exactly as Psalm 104 said. The mountains rose. Now, mainstream geology explains the very same fossils a different way. It says those rock layers really were an ancient sea floor, the floor of a vanished ocean called the Tethys, and that the slow-motion collision of India crashing into Asia over tens of millions of years buckled that seafloor upward into the Himalayas. The same fossils, the same mountains, and two very different timelines. But both readings agree on the one thing that matters for our question. The top of the world was once under the sea, and the seafloor is now the mountain. The water and the land traded places. Which brings us to the deepest answer of all. Not the geology, not the theories. The answer the text itself gives when it stops explaining how and starts telling you why the water can never come back. Go to the beach and watch the water for a while, and you'll see something so ordinary you've never once questioned it. The sea comes in, and then it stops. It reaches a line, and it goes no further. The most immense, restless force on the surface of the planet, an ocean that could swallow every city on Earth, halts at a line of wet sand as if it hit a wall. Why? What holds it back? The Bible has an answer for that, and once you've followed this whole mystery down, it lands with real weight. Go to the book of Job, chapter 38, one of the oldest passages in all of Scripture. God is speaking, and he describes shutting in the sea. He says he set bars and doors for it, and said, "This far shall you come, and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stopped." Bars and doors. For the ocean, a boundary set on the water by command. And that's the exact same idea we already found in Psalm 104. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. And it's the same promise God makes to Noah after the flood, in Genesis 9, sealed with the rainbow. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Never again. 3 different passages, Genesis, Job, and the Psalms, all circling the same quiet claim. These passages give a reason the water doesn't cover the world right now. The text says the sea is under orders. It is being held back, behind a boundary, on purpose. So put it all together, because now the pieces lock into place. The floodwater didn't vanish. That was never what the text said. It said the water returned, going and coming back like a tide, and where it returned to is the answer we kept finding over and over from every direction. It went down. Into the deep it may have come from. Into the ocean basins that sank to receive it. Into the 71% of this planet that is still, right now, covered by the very same water. You don't have to wonder where the floodwaters went. You can go and stand in front of them. They're called the ocean. And that reframes the entire story you thought you knew. We started by asking where all that water disappeared to, as if it were some cosmic accounting error the Bible forgot to explain. But the water didn't disappear. It's all still here. Every ocean, every sea, more of it locked deep inside the rock beneath your feet than anyone imagined a century ago. The flood didn't remove the water from the world. It just for one terrible year let the water go where it always wanted to go, over everything. And then the same hand that made the dry land the first time made it again, and drew a line, and told the sea where to stop. Which means every coastline on Earth is, in a strange way, a monument. Every beach is the edge of that boundary. The water is still here, still immense, still capable of everything Genesis described. And the only thing between it and the world is a line that, according to the text, was drawn on purpose and promised and has held ever since. Which brings us all the way back around to where we started. We started with a question that sounds like it should have an easy answer and doesn't. If the entire Earth was covered in water higher than the mountains, where did all of it go? And the version most people carry is that it rained for a while, and then somehow it all dried up, and the world went back to normal, as if a planet's worth of water could just evaporate into nowhere. But when we read the words slowly, the real answer turned out to be bigger and stranger. The text never said the water vanished. It said the water returned, it drained, it went back down into the deep it came from, into ocean basins that sank to receive it, held down by a rising land and driven by the same wind that first pulled dry ground out of the sea. Some read that flood as the whole globe, some as a vast region, but both land in the same place. The water didn't leave. It's the ocean you can visit tomorrow. It's the water hidden in the rock miles beneath you. It's the sea that still stops every single day at a line it is not allowed to cross. That's the whole reason this channel exists. To open the book back up and read what's actually on the page, even when the truth turns out to be stranger or deeper or bigger than the version we were handed. So here's the question worth sitting with. If the water is still here, all of it, still immense, still held back only by a boundary and a promise, then the flood was never really a story about water that went away. It was a story about a line that holds. And that makes you wonder what else is being held back, just out of sight. If this changed how you see even one story, subscribe, because next we're staying right here at the edge of the flood and asking the question this one kept circling. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. So what happened to it? And could anything of it still be up there? And the video on screen right now unpacks the world that drowned in the first place. Go ahead and click it. I think you'll want to know what was actually down there under all that water.